"Greetings, traveler. I'm glad to see you in my tavern. Here you may rest after a hard road, drink a mug of good ale, and listen to an old, honest witcher's tale, one that smells of smoke, winding roads, and silver coins." The wind was sharp that morning, carrying the scent of ashes and damp soil from the south. Geralt of Rivia rode along a narrow forest road, Roach's hooves thudding softly against the packed earth. The world had gone quiet since the wars had swept across the Pontar Valley. Villages burned, fields turned to mud, and men who once carried scythes now carried spears. Even the birds seemed cautious, chirping only when the Witcher passed, as though they sensed something unnatural in the pale-haired rider who bore 2 swords upon his back. He had come from the river town of Redwyn, where he'd left behind a trail of exhausted peasants and one overly talkative alderman who still owed him coin. There had been drowners near the ferry crossing, a dozen or more, drawn by the corpses drifting downriver from the fighting. Geralt had handled the problem as witchers do, with silver and fire oil, without fanfare, and for a price that barely paid for salt and saddle repairs. Now 3 days' ride north, he followed a rumor. A merchant had told him of a place called Red Wind, a hamlet half hidden among pine and stone, near the ruins of an old watchtower. The merchant's hands had trembled as he spoke of it. "Don't go near there, Witcher. The air itself peels flesh from bone. A curse, they say, born of soldier's blood and a mage's wrath." Geralt had listened, silent, his yellow eyes narrowing slightly. A wind that flayed flesh. He'd heard stranger things, but he had also heard lies shaped by fear. Still, work was work, and there was something about the tale, the mixture of magic and death, that tugged at his curiosity. The forest thickened as he rode. Shadows stretched long across the path, branches arching overhead like the ribs of a giant beast. He dismounted near a stream, knelt, and let Roach drink. The Witcher's hand moved to the amulet on his chest, a wolf's head of silver. It quivered faintly. Not danger yet, but magic nearby. Old, restless magic. A shape moved between the pines, a flicker like a man's silhouette. Geralt reached for his sword hilt, but when he stepped closer, the shape vanished into mist. Only a whisper remained, soft as the breeze. "Turn back." He frowned. "Not likely," he muttered and mounted again. By late afternoon, the sky had turned iron gray. The wind rose from the west, carrying the scent of blood and wet earth. Geralt found the village at dusk. Red Wind was small, perhaps 20 cottages and a half-collapsed barn clustered around a well. Smoke curled from only one chimney. The rest stood silent, doors barred, windows shuttered. He rode into the square. A dog barked once, then whimpered and slunk away. "Not much of a welcome," Geralt murmured. From the shadows of a porch, an old man emerged, wrapped in a wool cloak. His face was drawn, his eyes wary. "You're no soldier," he said hoarsely, too quiet, too cold in the eyes. "Witcher, then?" Geralt nodded. "Heard you've a wind that kills folk." The man spat into the dirt. "Aye, kills and takes the skin like a butcher's knife made of air. My boy was flayed 3 nights past and no one heard a thing. Just the wind howling." Others began to appear, women clutching children, men holding axes as though against ghosts, faces hollowed by hunger and fear. Geralt dismounted slowly, unstrapping his saddlebags. "Show me where it happened." The old man hesitated, glancing toward the forest. You'll not come back if you go there." "I've heard that before." They led him beyond the cottages, along a trail that wound through dead grass and stunted trees. The wind grew colder as they walked. Somewhere far off a raven croaked. The clearing ahead was ringed by stones, an ancient circle half buried and overgrown. In its center lay the remains of a man. What little was left. The body had been stripped clean, the flesh torn away in thin, curling ribbons. No track, only a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze, though the evening was cold. Geralt knelt, studying the ground. He touched the soil, brought his fingers to his nose. "Blood and ozone," he murmured. "Magic did this, not claws." The villagers shifted uneasily. "You can stop whispering," he said without looking up. "It won't hear you. Whatever this is, it's not a ghost, nor a curse born of the dead." "Then what?" the old man asked. Geralt stood, brushing dirt from his gloves. "That's what I'll find out." He looked toward the darkening forest, where the wind whistled through the trees with a sound like distant screaming. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw something glint red amid the shadows. A spark, or an eye. He turned back toward the village. "I'll need a place to stay, and a bottle of spirits if you've any left." The old man nodded grimly. "Aye, but if you hear the wind come whistling at your door, Witcher, best not to open it." Geralt gave a faint, humorless smile. "I'll keep that in mind." As night fell over Redwind, he sat in the one tavern still standing, a leaning wooden structure where the rafters groaned like old bones. The hearth burned low. He poured himself a measure of the harsh local brandy, its fumes stinging his nose. Outside, the wind began to rise again. It hissed through the cracks of the shutters, a long, mournful sound that seemed almost to form words. Geralt's amulet trembled once more. He set his drink down, listening. From somewhere beyond the village, a distant roar split the night, low and furious, like the breath of something vast and wounded. Roach snorted in the stable. The fire flickered. Geralt of Rivia rose from his chair, hand resting on the hilt of his silver sword. The red wind had begun to blow. The storm did not come all at once. It crept upon the village with a whisper and the uneasy creak of shutters. Geralt waited until the hearth's last embers faded to a dull glow, then fastened his sword. The moon was half veiled behind clouds, its light smudged and uncertain. The air carried a faint tang of iron, like the scent of old blood. He moved silently through the lanes of Redwind, boots sinking into the damp soil. The cottages crouched low and fearful, their roofs sagging under the weight of neglect. No candle burned in any window. Even the dogs hid beneath porches. Geralt's medallion quivered faintly, a restless hum at the edge of his senses. Magic still clung to the air like mist. He followed the sound of the wind, faint at first, then swelling as though it had found a voice. The gusts came from the east, where the forest loomed dark and endless. There, beyond the last fence, the trees swayed, as if caught in invisible hands. He found the first sign of disturbance near the old watchtower, a shattered stone monument overgrown with ivy. The ground was torn in places as though something large had scraped the earth. Geralt knelt beside a half-buried claw mark, deep, too deep for a wolf or bear. The soil smelled faintly of sulfur. "Not a spirit, then," he muttered. "Something with flesh and fire." He drew Igni's sign in the air, a brief flick of fingers, and a small flame sparked to life. It burned steady, though the wind howled all around. The Witcher traced the perimeter of the clearing. Bones lay scattered near the stones. Deer, perhaps, or goat. But but some bore scorch marks, the flesh blackened by unnatural heat. A voice called from behind him, soft and uncertain, "You shouldn't be here." Geralt turned swiftly, hand on his sword. A man stepped from the shadows, his robes tattered, a satchel slung across his shoulder. His hair was the color of sand, his face unshaven, but his eyes gleamed with a practiced calm. "Who are you?" Geralt asked. The stranger lifted both hands in a gesture of peace. "A healer. I live in the village. My name is Aradin Vel." "Healer?" The villagers didn't mention one. "They forget," Aradin said with a faint smile. "Fear makes people forget much. I came a month past hoping to help. Yet every night the wind grows stronger. Every night more blood is spilled." Geralt's medallion trembled again. He could sense the faint aura that surrounded the man, flickers of energy, the unmistakable trace of magic. "You're no simple healer?" Aradin hesitated, then sighed. "No, I studied at Aretusa once, before the war, before mages became fugitives." Geralt kept his gaze steady. "Then you know what's happening here." The mage's eyes flicked toward the forest. "Something old has awakened. I tried to contain it, but the spell..." He broke off, swallowing hard. "It's bound to rage in pain. Every attempt to still it only feeds its hunger." Geralt sheathed his sword slowly, though his hand remained near the hilt. "Tell me everything." Aradin knelt beside the stones, brushing moss away with trembling fingers. "Weeks ago, I found traces of a creature. Its blood, its cry. A dragonling, wounded and dying, caught in the war's fire. I thought I could save it. But when I cast the binding charm, the wind itself turned red with its pain. Now it guards the valley, unseen but deadly, driven mad by my mistake." Geralt's jaw tightened. "A cursed dragon. That explains the heat, the torn earth. The flaying wind is no curse. It's the air warped by the spell and the beast's fury." "I never meant harm," the mage whispered. "The Nilfgaardians hunted me. I thought the spell would hide us both." "Instead, you made a weapon," Geralt said coldly. The mage's shoulders sagged. "Can you stop it?" Geralt looked toward the dark line of trees. The wind howled again, wilder now, and the branches bent low as though bowing to some unseen will. "Maybe, but I'll need to find the dragon. The curse can't be undone while it's still bound." He turned to leave, but Aradin caught his arm. "Witcher, the creature isn't evil. It's only in pain." Geralt's expression was unreadable. "That depends on what it does next." He walked back toward the village as dawn crept pale across the sky. The air grew still, the wind retreating for a time as though the forest itself held its breath. Geralt entered the tavern, set his swords against the table, and began to mix potions. Cat for sight, tawny owl for stamina, thunderbolt for strength. The familiar scents filled the air, alchemical oils, herbs, and the faint bitterness of mandrake. When he finally slept, it was brief and restless. In his dreams he heard the wind again, and beneath it a sound like wings beating against stone. He woke to a scream. The door burst open and a boy stumbled inside, face white with terror. "The fields, it's come again. The wind, it took my father." Geralt was already moving. He slung his swords over his shoulder, his armor clinking softly. Outside, villagers ran through the mud, shouting and praying. The sky had turned crimson, though the sun was hidden. A gale tore through the wheat fields, bending stalks flat and hurling dust into the air. He sprinted toward the source. The gust hit him like a hammer, hot and sharp. The air shimmered red, forming swirling eddies. that cut through wood and straw as if they were paper. Through the haze, he glimpsed something vast, moving, shapes of wings half seen, as if woven of smoke and flame. Geralt raised his hand, fingers tracing the sign of Quen. A faint golden shield flared to life around him just as the wind lashed out. The impact drove him back a step, sparks flying as his barrier held. The creature's voice came through the storm, low and broken, neither roar nor word, but something between. It was pain-made sound. Geralt shouted over the howl, "I'm not here to kill you." But the wind only screamed louder. He drew his silver sword. Its edge caught the red light. He stepped forward, cutting through the gale, his eyes fixed on the flickering form ahead. For an instant he saw it clearly, a dragonling, scales the color of rust, one wing torn, eyes wild with agony. Chains of red light bound its limbs, pulsing with every ragged breath. "Damn you, Aradin," Geralt growled. The creature lunged, and the storm broke loose again. Geralt moved to meet it, blades flashing in the crimson wind. The air burned, the earth shook, and the sky itself seemed to bleed. The hunt for the red wind had truly begun. The morning after the battle dawned bleak and gray. The storm had passed, but the land still bore its scars. Trees lay splintered across the fields, roofs torn from cottages, the earth itself gouged open as if by a giant's claws. Smoke hung over Red Wind, mingling with the scent of blood and burnt straw. Geralt stood at the village edge, boots sunk deep in mud, his cloak stiff with dried rain. Behind him, the villagers whispered among themselves, glancing his way as though uncertain whether to thank or curse him. He ignored them. His attention was fixed on the trail of destruction that led toward the forest, a path carved by wind and fire alike. The beast was gone, vanished into the woods, but not far. He could feel its presence still, a low thrum in his medallion, a shiver beneath his skin. He knelt, fingers brushing the ground. The tracks were heavy, deep, and scattered with droplets of dark, viscous blood. Dragon blood. It shimmered faintly red, even in the dull light. "Still alive?" he muttered. "Good." A voice came from behind him, hoarse, uncertain. "You call that good, Witcher?" It was the old man who had first spoken to him, the one whose son had died. He leaned on a walking stick, his eyes rimmed red. "If it's alive," Geralt said, rising to his feet, "then it can still be freed. A dead beast tells me nothing. A living one tells me how to stop this." "Stop it?" You can't stop what's already cursed." Geralt adjusted the strap of his sword. "You can if you understand it." He turned from the man and walked toward the trees. The villagers said nothing more, though he could feel their eyes on his back, some filled with hope, most with hate. The forest was darker now, thick with mist. The ground steamed faintly where the red wind had touched it, leaving patches of scorched earth amid the moss. Geralt moved carefully, senses sharpened, cat potion heightening the faint glimmer of the world. Every droplet of dew caught the light like a shard of glass. Every movement of shadow seemed alive. He followed the blood trail deeper into the pines until he reached a clearing split by a ravine. The remains of an old stone bridge jutted from either side, half collapsed. Below, a narrow stream wound its way through the rocks, whispering faintly. The air smelled of ozone and burnt resin. He felt the presence before he saw it. A low rumble, not quite a growl, rolled through the mist. Then the dragon appeared, half hidden behind fallen trees. Its scales, once bright as copper, were dulled and blackened. One wing hung broken, the membrane torn to ribbons. The chains of crimson light still bound its neck and limbs, though they pulsed weakly now like embers dying in ash. Geralt stopped a dozen paces away. "You can understand me, can't you?" he said quietly. The creature's head lifted. Its eyes, amber, rimmed in red, met his. For a long moment neither moved. Then the dragon exhaled, a low, pained sound that stirred the mist. "I know you're not the cause," Geralt continued. "You're caught in it, trapped in something you don't deserve." The dragon's gaze flickered toward the woods, and Geralt sensed it then. The faint residue of magic, the same signature he'd felt around Aroden. The mage had been here, and recently. "You're not alone in this, are you?" Geralt said. The dragon shifted its weight. A ripple. The chains tightened briefly, then relaxed. Geralt took a careful step forward. The air buzzed faintly, warning him that the spell still lived. He knelt, examining the bindings. They were old magic, binding and elemental, twisted together. The mage had woven wind into the curse itself, using the dragon's pain as its fuel. Break the chain and the spell would unravel, but if done wrongly, it would take the beast's life and possibly his own. Geralt's jaw tightened. "Complicated bastard," he murmured. A rustle behind him drew his attention. He turned swiftly, hand on his sword, but it was only Aroden. The mage looked pale, his cloak torn, his face streaked with soot. "You followed me," Geralt said flatly. "I had to," Aroden replied. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do." "No, you don't." The mage stepped forward, eyes wide. "You think it's just a curse, but the wind, it's alive now. It feeds on the dragon's heart. Kill the beast and the storm will break free without a vessel. It will destroy everything for leagues." Geralt's expression hardened. "And whose fault is that?" Aroden flinched, but did not look away. "I tried to help it, I swear. But the spell, something went wrong. I can't undo it alone." Geralt looked back at the dragon. "Then we'll do it together." The mage hesitated. "You trust me?" "I don't trust you," Geralt said, "but I trust that you want to live, and that gives me enough reason." He stepped closer to the dragon, drawing a small vial from his pouch, a mixture of powdered silver and drake oil. He smeared it along the blade of his silver sword, then knelt beside the chains. "When I cut, you cast. Keep the winds contained or they'll tear us both apart." Aroden nodded shakily and raised his hands. Arcane symbols flared in the air, glowing blue against the mist. Geralt took a steadying breath and swung. The sword met resistance like solid air. Sparks burst from the wind, howled, rising to a shriek. The dragon roared in pain, its wings beating weakly against the ground. Geralt gritted his teeth and struck again. The final chain snapped, the red light shattering like glass. For a heartbeat, all was silent. Then the air exploded. A storm burst from the dragon's chest, a spiral of crimson wind that clawed at the trees and tore leaves into dust. Geralt was thrown to the ground, his shield flaring as he rolled behind a fallen trunk. Aroden screamed, his spell barely holding as the tempest raged. "Hold it," Geralt shouted. "Bind it before it escapes." The mage's voice strained. "I can't. Its power, it's too strong." Geralt rose, planted his sword in the ground, and traced the sign of Yrden. The circle flared purple, anchoring the storm within its bounds. The wind battered against the barrier, shrieking in fury. The dragon lifted its head, eyes clearing. The madness was gone. It looked at Geralt, then at the mage, and with a single, shuddering breath, it spread its wings. The gust that followed was clean, not red, not cursed, but free. The tempest faded. The chains were gone, only silence remained. Geralt exhaled, lowering his sword. The dragon stood tall now, wounded but alive. It regarded them both for a long moment, then turned toward the mountains and took flight, its silhouette fading into the mist. Aridin sank to his knees, trembling. "It's over," he whispered. Geralt shook his head. "No, it's changed. The curse broke, but something still lingers." The mage looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Geralt's gaze swept the forest. The air was too still. No birds sang. The silence had a weight to it, as if waiting. "The red wind isn't gone," he said quietly. "It's moving, searching for another host." And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, the wind began to whisper once more. The forest, the trees, stripped bare by the storm, stood motionless beneath a sky that still flickered with dying light. Geralt watched the red-tinged clouds drift apart, slow and heavy, and only when the last shudder of wind passed did he sheath his sword. His medallion was still vibrating faintly, uneven, pulsing like a heartbeat. The storm was gone, but the magic that birthed it still lingered. Aridin knelt nearby, his robes torn and face pale. The mage's hands trembled as he gathered the scattered remnants of his focus crystal, a small cracked sphere that had once held his control spell. It was gray now, the color leached away. Geralt turned toward him. "You're alive," he said evenly. Aridin looked up, his voice weak. "Barely. The binding shattered when you cut the last chain. The energy—" "I felt it," Geralt interrupted. "If I hadn't anchored it with Eärden, neither of us would be standing." The mage nodded, shame flickering in his eyes. "I thought I could contain it, that I could keep it from spreading." Geralt's tone was flat. "You were wrong." The words hung between them. For a long while, only the stream beneath the ravine filled the silence, whispering its quiet song through the stones. Then Geralt turned toward the path leading back to Red Wind. "Come on," he said. "We're not finished." The mage hesitated. "You still think it lives? The curse?" Geralt's gaze cut toward the horizon. "I know it does. The wind doesn't die, it moves. You gave it life, Aridin. It won't stop until it finds another form to feed on." They walked in silence for a time, following the broken trail through the woods. The air smelled cleaner now, though beneath the freshness lay something sour like decay. As they neared the village, they saw the first signs that the curse had not ended. A field lay flattened, wheat stalks bent in spirals, as though pressed by unseen hands. The windmills stood still, yet their blades creaked. A raven perched upon one of them, its feathers stained with red dust. When Geralt passed beneath, it shrieked and took flight, leaving behind a feather that glimmered faintly, unnaturally. The Witcher picked it up, turning it between his fingers. "It's carrying traces," he said. The storm left its mark. Aridin's brow furrowed. "Then it's spreading." "Maybe," Geralt replied, "or maybe it's waiting for something stronger." They reached the village as the first light of evening burned across the sky. The people gathered at the edge of the square, faces grim but expectant. The old man was there too, leaning on his stick. "Well?" he rasped. "Did you kill it?" Geralt dismounted, his expression unreadable. "No." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "You didn't?" The old man spat. "Then what in all the hells did you do?" "I freed it," Geralt said simply. The man stared, his weathered face twisting in disbelief. "Freed it? You mean you let the damn monster loose?" Geralt's tone hardened. "It wasn't the monster, the curse was. And it's not finished with you yet." The words struck the villagers silent. A woman clutched her child closer, eyes wide. You mean it's still out there? Geralt nodded. The dragon's gone, but something of the wind remains. I can feel it. Keep your doors barred tonight. Burn salt and oak bark in your hearths. He turned to leave, but the old man stepped forward, blocking his path. You bring us fear instead of peace, he growled. We should never have called you. Geralt's yellow eyes met his. You didn't call me. I came because someone needed help. You can thank me or curse me as you like. It won't change what's coming. For a moment, the two men stared at each other in silence. Then the Witcher brushed past and strode toward the tavern. Inside, he found what warmth remained in the hearth and sat down, removing his gauntlets. Aradin followed. You think it will come here? Geralt poured a measure of ale, though he didn't drink it. It was born here. If it seeks a host, it'll start where it began. And if it finds one, Geralt's eyes flicked up. Then Red Wind becomes its name for good. The mage sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. There must be a way to bind it again. Properly this time. There's always a way, Geralt said, but binding it means giving it shape again. Power, and that always demands a cost. Outside, the wind began to stir once more. It was soft at first, a mere sigh through the gaps in the shutters. But it grew steadily, a hollow voice whispering through the rafters. The fire in the hearth guttered, its flame bending sideways as though pressed by invisible fingers. Geralt rose to his feet. Stay inside, he ordered the mage. If it's come back, it'll come for you first. Before Aradin could answer, the door burst open. A young man stumbled in, his face white with fear. The well, he gasped. It's screaming. Geralt was already moving. He snatched his sword and pushed past the boy into the square. The well at the center of Red Wind glowed faintly red beneath the dark sky. The wind spun in circles above it, drawing dust and straw into a funnel that rose toward the clouds. And beneath the howling came a sound that froze the villagers where they stood, a voice faint but unmistakable, calling from the depths. Aradin! The mage stepped out of the tavern, face ashen. It knows my name. Geralt moved toward the well, his medallion vibrating wildly. Stay back, he shouted, but the mage didn't listen. He stepped forward, drawn as though by invisible strings. Aradin! The voice cried again, louder now, its tone shifting from pleading to rage. The air thickened. The funnel of wind collapsed inward, striking the ground with a deafening crack. The well burst open, stones flying outward, and a column of red mist shapes formed within it. Faces, eyes, claws made of air and fury. Geralt drew both swords, steel for the living, silver for the damned, and stepped between the villagers and the storm. The ground trembled beneath his boots. The Red Wind had returned, no longer tied to dragon or spell, but something far worse, an echo of all the deaths it had caused, a storm with memory and hunger. Geralt muttered under his breath, So this is what you've become. He drew a sign in the air, Quen shimmering to life around him. Let's see if you can bleed. The wind screamed and surged forward. The Witcher met it head on. The clash tore through the square like thunder. Dust and blood filled the air, and the villagers scattered, fleeing into the dark. Aradin stood frozen at the edge of the storm, torn between terror and guilt. Through it all, Geralt fought, his movements swift and sure. Each stroke of his blade carved light through the crimson haze. Each sign he cast burning holes in the storm. But it was vast, too vast. The wind was everywhere, inside every corner of air. It lashed his face, tore at his cloak and hissed in voices that weren't its own. At last he struck deep into the heart of the swirling red. For a heartbeat, the storm recoiled. He glimpsed something at its core, a flicker of the dragon's essence bound and burning still. Then the wind screamed one last time and burst outward in a wave that hurled him to the ground. Silence fell. Geralt rose slowly, ears ringing, sword slick with crimson residue. The wind was gone. The well stood empty, its stones cold and wet, but the air smelled of iron again, and the Witcher knew as he sheathed his sword that the red wind had not died. It had merely changed form once more. He looked toward the forest, where the mist had begun to move against the breeze. "It's hunting again," he said quietly. And the night, dark and heavy, swallowed the words whole. The night that followed was thick as not a single star dared to shine over red wind. The wind was gone again. Or perhaps it was hiding, waiting for the right breath to take. Geralt remained awake through the long hours, seated before the tavern's dying fire, his swords laid out on the table, the steel glinting dully in the glow. The battle at the well had left him bruised and drained. His medallion still trembled faintly, pulsing in irregular beats like the heart of something that refused to die. Aradin sat across from him, his face drawn and hollow. He had not spoken since the storm broke. When he did, his voice was hoarse, a whisper clawing its way through exhaustion. "It spoke my name," he said at last. "You heard it. It knows me." Geralt didn't look up. "It remembers you. You created it." "I didn't create..." The mage stopped, his eyes full of guilt. "No, perhaps I did. I only wanted to save the creature." Geralt glanced up, yellow eyes cold as winter. Good intentions burn the brightest just before they set the world on fire. The mage turned away, shivering. "If the storm carries my mark, then it will hunt me. It's bound to my name." "Then you'll draw it out?" Geralt said simply. "We use you as bait." Aradin flinched. "You'd risk that?" "I've risked worse," Geralt replied. "You wanted redemption. Here's your chance." He rose, adjusted his sword belt, and strode toward the door. The tavern creaked as he opened it. Outside, the village lay quiet, too quiet. Even the insects had fallen silent. The air was heavy, thick with damp mist that rolled low across the ground. Geralt stepped into it, boots whispering against the soil. "Stay inside," he said over his shoulder. "If it wants you, it'll come soon." The mage remained behind, his pale face half lit by the fire. "And if it comes for you?" Geralt didn't answer. He walked into the fog. The night deepened, turning the forest into a shifting dream of shadow. The Witcher followed the narrow track toward the ravine, each step measured, every sense sharpened by Cat's lingering touch. He could hear the slow drip of water from branches, the creak of roots beneath the soil, and beneath all that, faint but constant, the low hum of something stirring far away. When he reached the broken bridge, he stopped. The stones were wet, gleaming like bone. He crouched and ran a gloved hand along the edge, cold, slick, with a faint film of residue that shimmered red when it caught the light. "Still here," he murmured, "still hungry." He rose, scanning the woods. The mist shifted, forming shapes that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Faces, figures, nothing more than the mind's tricks. Yet one shape lingered longer than the rest, tall, cloaked in shadow, watching from between two pines. Geralt drew his sword without sound. "Come on then," he whispered. The shape didn't move. The mist thickened around it until it burst apart with a hiss, and the wind struck. It came not as air, but as force, a wall of pressure that hurled branches and leaves in all directions. Geralt dropped to one knee, Quen flaring golden around him. The barrier rippled, bending beneath the assault. The Witcher pushed forward, slicing through the gale with his blade. The steel glowed faintly blue, coated with dimeridium oil. "Show yourself," he growled. From the heart of the storm came laughter, soft, distorted, but unmistakably human. The wind curled into a voice that echoed through the trees. "Geralt of Rivia, you freed me once. Why chain me again?" He turned, scanning the shadows. "You're no spirit, you're a wound that learned to speak. And you, Witcher, are death given patience." The storm surged, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against a tree. His ribs burned. He rolled, landed hard, and slashed upward through the red. For a heartbeat, the wind broke, revealing a figure within. Human in outline, but formed entirely of swirling crimson air. Its eyes were hollow spirals of flame. Geralt struck, blade passing through it as though through smoke. The creature shrieked and reformed, slamming into him again. He drew the sign of Írden, casting a ring of violet light that anchored the air. The storm faltered. He could hear the voice again. Aradin's voice carried within it, twisted and doubled. "You cannot kill what you freed." "Maybe not," Geralt hissed, "but I can cage it." He pressed his hand to the ground, tracing a runic pattern in the dirt. Silver sparks flared as he spoke the ancient words of the wolf school, binding words meant to trap the unseen. The wind thrashed wildly, tearing at his cloak. The figure screamed, its voice breaking into countless echoes. Then all at once it vanished. Silence. Geralt rose, breathing hard. The forest was still again. The mist began to thin, curling away into the night. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked toward the path back to the village. Something had changed. The air felt cleaner, lighter, but also emptier, as if something essential had been torn away. He frowned, his medallion still trembling faintly. "Too easy," he muttered. He made his way back, each step cautious. The village lights glimmered faintly ahead, but as he neared, he felt it, the air shifting once more, colder this time. The mist crept back along the ground, and then he heard it, screaming. Geralt broke into a run. When he burst into the square, chaos awaited him. The villagers were fleeing from the tavern, faces pale with terror. The windows glowed red from within, the wind howling like a living thing. "Aradin!" Geralt shouted. He kicked the door open. Inside, the air was thick with crimson smoke. The mage stood in the center of the room, surrounded by swirling symbols of fire. His eyes glowed faintly, his face twisted with strain. "I can't. It's inside me." Geralt stepped forward, sword in hand. "Then stop fighting it." The mage's voice cracked. "If I let go, it'll kill us both," Geralt interrupted. "Then we take it down together." He slashed the blade through the air, casting a sign that burst in a flare of white. The light struck the mage, shattering the fiery sigils around him. The wind screamed and surged outward, slamming into walls, tearing through beams. Geralt caught Aradin as he collapsed, the mage's skin fever-hot. The storm's voice rose again, but weaker now, splintered. "He was mine." Geralt bared his teeth. "Not anymore." He plunged his sword into the tavern floor. The runes along the blade's edge burned silver, drawing in the crimson mist. The air twisted, shuddered, and then imploded into silence. For a long time neither man moved. Then Aradin stirred, his voice faint. "Did we?" Geralt looked toward the shattered door. The night outside was calm, no wind, no whisper, only the sighing of dying embers. "For now," the Witcher said, "it's sleeping. But the kind of curse you made doesn't die so easy." The mage closed his eyes. "Then I'll go with it if I must." Geralt looked down at him, expression unreadable. "You might not have a choice." He rose, stepping into the night. Above, the clouds broke at last, revealing a sliver of moonlight. The air was cold, still, and pure. Yet somewhere in the far distance, faint as a breath, the wind sighed again, soft, sorrowful, and red. Geralt listened, the ghost of a grim smile crossing his face. "So," he murmured, "you're not done with me yet?" He adjusted his swords, tightened Roach's reins, and looked east toward the open road. The night stretched wide before him, dark and waiting. The wind had gone quiet, but in his bones, the Witcher could already feel it gathering again. Dawn came cold and uncertain, spilling thin gold over the wreck of red wind. Smoke rose from the smoldering tavern roof. The village was silent, save for the crackle of dying fires and the soft tread of Geralt's boots upon the damp earth. The Witcher moved slowly through the square, his eyes scanning the ruins for movement, though he already knew he would find none. The villagers had fled before sunrise. Only a few remained, too frightened or too stubborn to run. They watched him from their doorways, faces pale with exhaustion, the horror of the night still etched in every line. None dared to speak, none dared to meet his gaze. He paused near the well, now nothing more than a pit of broken stones. A faint scent lingered there, the same metallic tang of magic and burnt air. The wind curse had dispersed, but its essence clung to the ground like a ghost refusing to leave its grave. Behind him came the sound of footsteps. Geralt turned, hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. Aridin stood a short distance away, wrapped in a torn cloak, his expression grim. "You shouldn't be walking," Geralt said. "You barely survived the last encounter." The mage's voice was weak, but steady. "I'll not lie in bed while others die for my mistakes." Geralt's gaze lingered on him for a moment before he nodded. "Then walk carefully. The storm might be gone, but it left something behind. Look." He pointed toward the trees beyond the village. The mist there was faintly tinted with red, drifting between the trunks like smoke. It moved unnaturally against the breeze. Aridin frowned. "Residual magic. The wind's essence clings to matter that absorbed it. Soil, bark, water, even flesh." Geralt's tone was low, meaning it can spread. The mage nodded slowly. "If it finds a strong enough vessel, it will manifest again. Then we'll find it first." They stood in silence for a time, listening to the forest whisper. Then Geralt turned toward Roach, who pawed the ground impatiently. He mounted, adjusting the straps on his saddlebags. "We'll start near the ravine. If the curse is reborn, that's where it will begin to grow." Aridin climbed onto a mule the villagers had offered, its coat mottled and dull. He looked uneasy in the saddle. "You've hunted monsters your whole life, Witcher. Tell me truly, what do you think this thing is now?" Geralt didn't answer immediately. The sun glimmered through the trees ahead, painting long shadows across the road. "It's not a creature anymore," he said at last. "It's an idea given form. Pain, rage, guilt. Those don't die. They only change shape." The mage shuddered. "Then we're chasing a storm, made of memory." Geralt gave a curt nod. "And it remembers you best." They rode in silence for several miles, following the stream that wound through the forest. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the smell of rot began to seep through the moss. Birds no longer sang. Only the sound of the water remained. a slow, steady trickle that seemed almost deliberate. At last they reached the ravine. The stones were blackened where the curse had torn through days before. The air shimmered faintly, distorting the light. Geralt dismounted, his boots crunching on brittle leaves. "Stay behind me," he said. Aradin obeyed, clutching the staff he'd fashioned from a broken cart shaft. Together they descended toward the ravine's edge. The water below had turned reddish-brown, reflecting the dull sky above. When Geralt knelt to touch it, his medallion vibrated sharply. "Still active?" he muttered. "Whatever remains of it, it's rooted here." The mage joined him, extending a hand over the water. "I can feel it too. The magic runs deep. It's not fading, it's feeding." "On what?" Aradin hesitated, then looked toward the forest. "Life. Every living thing in reach." As if in answer, a sound rippled through the trees, a rustling that was not the wind. The Witcher rose swiftly, drawing his steel sword. The mage stepped back, eyes wide. The forest came alive. Branches shook violently. Birds erupted from the treetops, screaming as they fled, and then came a low, guttural groan, like the earth itself, protesting some deep wound. Geralt moved forward, scanning the shadows. Something's coming. From the underbrush emerged shapes, human shapes. The villagers who had fled hours earlier stumbled into the clearing, their faces pale, eyes vacant. Their mouths moved soundlessly, their bodies stiff. Aradin's breath caught. "They've been taken." The Witcher's tone was grim. "No, they've been emptied." The first of the villagers stepped closer, its head twitching unnaturally. Its skin shimmered faintly red beneath the surface, veins glowing like molten lines. Geralt raised his sword. "Back," he warned. They didn't stop. He swung once, clean and precise. The body fell, dissolving into red dust before it hit the ground. The others didn't react. They advanced in eerie silence, their movements stiff as marionettes. Aradin whispered a spell, a wave of blue light rippling from his staff. It struck one of the figures, freezing it mid-step, but the others pressed on. Geralt fought with swift efficiency, his blade cutting arcs of light through the fog. Every strike shattered another puppet, yet more emerged from the trees. "They're endless," Aradin shouted. "They're fragments," Geralt replied. "Pieces of the wind-made flesh. It's testing us." The mage looked toward the ravine, where the water now churned violently. "It's gathering strength." "Then we cut its root." Geralt sheathed his steel and drew the silver blade, the runes along its edge flaring white. "Hold them off." He leapt toward the ravine's edge, sliding down the slope to the stream bed. The water hissed where his boots touched it, glowing faintly around his steps. The current twisted, rising against him as if alive. He plunged his sword deep into the center of the flow, driving it into the rock below. The ground shuddered. The red light beneath the surface, a scream, vast, inhuman, echoed through the forest. The possessed villagers fell where they stood, their bodies collapsing into dust that scattered on the wind. When the echo faded, silence returned. The water ran clear again. Geralt climbed back up the slope, breathing heavily. The mage waited for him, eyes wide. "Did you destroy it?" The Witcher wiped blood and dust from his blade. "No. I cut its tether. It'll have to find another anchor." Aradin sagged against a tree, trembling. "Then it's still alive." Geralt's expression darkened. "A storm doesn't die when it leaves one valley. It just moves on to the next." They stood together at the edge of the ravine, the wind stirring faintly around them. gentle this time, almost kind. But Geralt knew better. The red wind was learning, changing, waiting for a new form to wear. He turned toward the north, where the hills rose like the backs of sleeping beasts. "We follow it," he said, "before it finds someone else to wear?" Aradin nodded, his face pale but resolute. "And if we fail?" Geralt mounted Roach, eyes narrowing against the dawn's glare. "Then the wind won't stop until there's nothing left to burn." With that, he spurred his horse forward, and the two riders disappeared into the morning mist, leaving Red Wind behind, quiet, lifeless, and forever marked by the storm that bore its name. The hunt would continue. Dawn came cold and uncertain, spilling thin gold over the wreck of Red Wind. Smoke rose from the smoldering tavern roof, twisting lazily into the morning sky. The village was silent save for the crackle of dying fires and the soft tread of Geralt's boots upon the damp earth. The Witcher moved slowly through the square, his eyes scanning the ruins for movement, though he already knew he would find none. The villagers had fled before sunrise. Only a few remained, too frightened or too stubborn to run. They watched him from their doorways, faces pale with exhaustion, the horror of none dared to speak, none dared to meet his gaze. He paused near the well, now nothing more than a pit of broken stones. A faint scent lingered there, the same metallic tang of magic and burnt air. The wind curse had dispersed, but its essence clung to the ground like a ghost refusing to leave its grave. Behind him came the sound of footsteps. Geralt turned, hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. Aradin stood a short distance away, wrapped in a torn cloak, his expression grim. "You shouldn't be walking," Geralt said. "You barely survived the last encounter." The mage's voice was weak but steady. "I'll not lie in bed while others die for my mistakes." Geralt's gaze lingered on him for a moment before he nodded. "Then walk carefully. The storm might be gone, but it left something behind. Look." He pointed toward the trees beyond the village. The mist there was faintly tinted with red, drifting between the trunks like smoke. It moved unnaturally against the breeze. Aradin frowned. Residual magic. The wind's essence clings to matter that absorbed it. Soil, bark, water, even flesh. Geralt's tone was low, meaning it can spread. The mage nodded slowly. "If it finds a strong enough vessel, it will manifest again. Then we'll find it first." They stood in silence for a time, listening to the forest whisper. Then Geralt turned toward Roach, who pawed the ground impatiently. He mounted, adjusting the straps on his saddlebags. "We'll start near the ravine. That's where the magic first anchored itself. If the curse is reborn, that's where it will begin to grow." Aradin climbed onto a mule the villagers had offered, its coat mottled and dull. He looked uneasy in the saddle. "You've hunted monsters your whole life, Witcher. Tell me truly, what do you think this thing is now?" Geralt didn't answer immediately. The sun glimmered through the trees ahead, painting long shadows across the road. It's an idea given form. Pain, rage, guilt. Those don't die, they only change shape. The mage shuddered. "Then we're chasing a storm made of memory." Geralt gave a curt nod. "And it remembers you best." They rode in silence for several miles, following the stream that wound through the forest. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the smell of rot began to seep through the moss. Birds no longer sang. Only the sound of the water remained, a slow, steady trickle that seemed almost deliberate. At last they reached the ravine. The stones were blackened where the curse had torn through days before. The air shimmered faintly, distorting the light. Geralt dismounted, his boots crunching on brittle leaves. "Stay behind me," he said. Aridin obeyed, clutching the staff he'd fashioned from a broken cart shaft. Together they descended toward the ravine's edge. The water below had turned reddish-brown, reflecting the dull sky above. When Geralt knelt to touch it, his medallion vibrated sharply. "Still active," he muttered. "Whatever remains of it, it's rooted here." The mage joined him, extending a hand over the water. "I can feel it too. The magic runs deep. It's not fading, it's feeding." "On what?" Aridin hesitated, then looked toward the forest. "Life, every living thing in reach." As if in answer, a sound rippled through the trees, a rustling that was not the wind. The Witcher rose swiftly, drawing his steel sword. The mage stepped back, eyes wide. The forest came alive. Branches shook violently, though the air was still. Birds erupted from the treetops, screaming as they fled. And then came a low, guttural groan, like the earth itself protesting some deep wound. Geralt moved forward, scanning the shadows. "Something's coming." From the underbrush emerged shapes, human shapes. The villagers who had fled hours earlier stumbled into the clearing, their faces pale, eyes vacant. Their mouths moved soundlessly, their bodies stiff. "They've been taken." The Witcher's tone was grim. "No, they've been emptied." The first of the villagers stepped closer, its head twitching unnaturally. Its skin shimmered faintly red beneath the surface, veins glowing like molten lines. Geralt raised his sword. "Back," he warned. They didn't stop. He swung once, clean and precise. The body fell, dissolving into red dust before it hit the ground. The others didn't react. They advanced in eerie silence, their movements stiff as marionettes. Aridin whispered a spell, a wave of blue light rippling from his staff. It struck one of the figures, freezing it mid-step, but the others pressed on. Geralt fought with swift efficiency, his blade cutting arcs of light through the fog. Every strike shattered another puppet, yet more emerged from the trees. "They're endless," Aridin shouted. "They're fragments," Geralt replied. "Pieces of the wind made flesh. It's testing us." The mage looked toward the ravine, where the water now churned violently. "It's gathering strength." "Then we cut its root." Geralt sheathed his steel and drew the silver blade, the runes along its edge flaring white. "Hold them off." He leapt toward the ravine's edge, sliding down the slope to the stream bed. The water hissed where his boots touched it, glowing faintly around his steps. The current twisted, rising against him as if alive. He plunged his sword deep into the center of the flow, driving it into the rock below. The ground shuddered. The red light beneath the surface flared, then cracked like glass. A scream, vast, inhuman, echoed through the forest. The possessed villagers fell where they stood, their bodies collapsing into dust that scattered on the wind. When the echo faded, silence returned. The water ran clear again. Geralt climbed back up the slope, breathing heavily. The mage waited for him, eyes wide. "Did you destroy it?" The Witcher wiped blood and dust from his blade. "No, it'll have to find another anchor." Aridin sagged against a tree, trembling. "Then it's still alive." Geralt's expression darkened. "A storm doesn't die when it leaves one valley. It just moves on to the next." They stood together at the edge of the ravine, the wind stirring faintly around them, gentle this time, almost kind. But Geralt knew better. The red wind was learning, changing, waiting for a new form to wear. He turned toward the north, where the hills rose like the backs of sleeping beasts. "We follow it," he said, "before it finds someone else to wear." Aridin nodded, his face pale but resolute. "And if we fail?" Geralt mounted Roach, eyes narrowing against the dawn's glare. "Then the wind won't stop until there's nothing left to burn." With that, he spurred his horse forward, and the two riders disappeared into the morning mist, leaving Redwind behind. Quiet, lifeless, and forever marked by the storm that bore its name. They rode until the trees thinned and the land opened into the low hills of the northern frontier. Dawn had burned away the mist, yet the world felt no cleaner for it. Smoke hung on the horizon where distant villages smoldered, the remnants of another Nilfgaardian raid. Carrion birds circled above the fields, their cries sharp and cruel. Geralt said little as they went. Roach's hooves struck the hard ground with a steady rhythm, the sound echoing across the emptiness. Aridin followed in silence, his mule plodding heavily behind. The mage's face was drawn tight with fatigue. His magic, though strong, had drained him near to breaking, and the weight of guilt pressed upon him like iron. More than once he opened his mouth to speak, but the Witcher's expression, grim, unyielding, kept him quiet. By midday they reached a shallow vale where an old waystone stood half buried in moss. Geralt dismounted and ran his fingers across the worn symbols carved into its surface. The script was elder speech. Aridin leaned over his shoulder, squinting. "A boundary marker?" "Older," Geralt replied. This was part of the druidic wards that once kept monsters from wandering too near human settlements. The northern priests called them the Stones of Breath. When a wind spirit passed close, these things would hum like flutes. Would they still work? Geralt's mouth tightened. They might have once, but someone's broken this one. He pointed to a deep crack running through the stone's heart. And when the barrier fails, the winds have free passage. Aridin's eyes darkened. Then the red wind could travel north. It already has. The Witcher looked toward the valley below. A faint red shimmer drifted across the fields, almost invisible in the daylight, yet unmistakable to one who had seen it before. Geralt's medallion quivered against his chest. They pressed on, following the trail into a ruined hamlet. The place had been abandoned months before. Roofs sagged, wells lay dry, and the air reeked of mildew and ash. Crows watched them from the rafters, feathers black as pitch. "Wait here," Geralt said. He moved among the ruins. Senses sharpened. The faint hum of magic lingered in the air, though not as strong as at Redwind. It was the scent of the same curse carried here by some drifting current. He found signs of struggle near a collapsed barn. Bones half buried in the dirt, gnawed clean. A fragment of armor glinted among them, Nilfgaardian. So the storm had not been idle. It fed upon the living wherever it went. Aridin approached quietly. "You think the wind killed them?" Geralt straightened. "No doubt. The red wind doesn't care whose banner you wear." The mage's face hardened. "Then we should use that, if we can turn its fury against the Empire." Geralt's gaze cut to him, sharp as a blade. "You want to weaponize it?" "I want to end it." "If we bind it properly this time, anchor it to my life instead of the dragon's, it will die with me when my time comes." Geralt studied him in silence. "You're talking about suicide." The mage looked away. "I'm talking about penance." The Witcher said nothing for a long while. The only sound was the faint rustle of wind through dead grass. Finally, he spoke. If we fail, you'll die for nothing. If we succeed, the North might have one less storm to fear. Either way, I'll see it done. Aradin nodded once, as though the weight of that choice had already been accepted long ago. They spent the afternoon preparing. Geralt gathered what alchemical reagents he had left, dimeritium dust, white gull, powdered silver, and mixed them into a thick paste. Aradin drew a circle of runes around the old waystone, tracing each sigil with ash and blood. By dusk, the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. When the first stars appeared, the wind began to rise. It came slowly at first, whispering through the grass. Then, like a great beast waking, it gathered strength. The night filled with a low hum that crawled beneath the skin. The broken waystone pulsed with dull red light. Aradin raised his hands, chanting under his breath. The ground shook as the magic took hold, a barrier forming between the stones and the sky. Geralt stood at the edge of the circle, silver sword drawn, every muscle coiled. The wind howled, and the world split open. A column of crimson air burst from the valley floor, twisting upward into a towering spiral. Within its shapes writhed and clawed, half-formed faces, screaming in silence. The red wind had come, drawn by its maker's call. Aradin's voice rose, the spell building toward its peak. The runes flared bright blue, cutting lines through the darkness. The storm struck the barrier, shattering against it in waves of fury. Lightning arced across the sky, crimson instead of white. "Seal it!" Geralt stepped forward, planting his sword in the center of the circle. The blade sank into the earth with a sound like thunder. Silver light surged up its length, connecting the Witcher to the storm. He felt its power, vast, ancient, terrible, pour through him. Pain seared every nerve, but he held fast, teeth gritted. The wind screamed louder, a voice of many tongues blending into one. "You cannot cage the Sky Butcher." "Watch me," Geralt snarled. He forced the sign of Írden into the ground. The circle blazed brighter, holding for a moment longer. Aradin's chant faltered, the words twisting as the wind turned upon him. The mage stumbled, blood streaming from his nose. "Keep going!" Geralt roared. Aradin gasped, eyes wide with terror. "It's too strong! It's feeding on—" The rest was lost in the roar. The barrier shattered. The wind exploded outward, knocking them both to the ground. Geralt rolled, his ears ringing. The storm rose high above, coalescing into a single vast form. It no longer looked like mist, but like a creature, vaguely human, crowned with horns of flame, its body rippling with shifting light. The red wind had taken shape. It turned its burning gaze upon Aradin. The mage crawled backward, whispering half-formed spells. The creature's hand reached out, a tendril of air wrapping around him. Geralt leapt to his feet, slashing through the tendril. Sparks flew where his silver met wind. "Run!" he shouted, but Aradin did not run. He rose instead, eyes blazing with defiance. "No more running!" He thrust his staff forward, shouting words that cracked the night. The air around him burst into light. For a heartbeat, the creature faltered. Then the mage was gone, consumed in a blaze of red and white. The storm screamed, shuddered, and imploded. When silence returned, only ashes remained where Aradin had stood. The waystone lay split clean in two. Geralt staggered to his knees, chest heaving. The air smelled of rain. He waited a long time before speaking. "Penance granted," he said softly. He sheathed his sword, mounted Roach, and turned back toward the empty road. Far above, the stars shone cold and distant. But in the east, beyond the black line of forest, a faint crimson shimmer still glowed, weak but alive. The red wind had not died. It had merely learned the cost of survival. And somewhere on the edge of the world, it began to stir again. The road beyond the vale wound through marshland, a desolation of black reeds and shallow pools that mirrored the bruised sky. Geralt guided Roach along the narrow causeway, the horse's hooves sloshing through the muck. The air was thick with the stench of rot and stagnant water, a heaviness that clung to skin and armor alike. Behind him the wind whispered faintly, gentle now, no longer howling, but carrying with it a presence that made the Witcher's medallion hum like a living thing. He had buried Aridin at dawn beneath a willow beside the ruined waystone. There had been little left of the mage to lay to rest, only fragments of scorched cloth and a few shards of crystal from his staff. Geralt had marked the grave with a simple cairn of stone. No words had been spoken. The wind itself had provided the eulogy, sighing softly through the broken hills, as though mocking the futility of men who sought to master it. The Witcher had ridden north after that, drawn by the faint crimson shimmer that lingered on the horizon. The red wind lived on, dispersed but unbroken, seeking new soil to claim. He followed it as one might follow the trail of a wounded beast, though he knew this quarry was no longer of flesh or bone. Toward evening, he reached a lonely watchtower overlooking the marsh. The structure leaned precariously, its stones mottled with lichen. An old banner hung from the ramparts, blue and white once, now gray with age. Smoke curled from a campfire near its base. 3 men sat around the fire, soldiers by the look of their armor. One noticed him first and rose, hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "Traveler," the man called, "state your business." "Passing through," Geralt replied, "looking for shelter until dawn." The man eyed him warily. "You don't look like any merchant or pilgrim." Geralt's tone remained calm. "I'm neither. Witcher." That word changed the air between them. The other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. One spat into the dirt. "Mutant, then. Don't cause trouble and you can share the fire." Geralt nodded once and dismounted. He tied Roach to a post, then sat near the edge of the firelight, removing his gloves. The soldiers watched him in silence, curiosity mingled with distrust. After a time, the first man spoke again. "You came from the south? From the valley?" Geralt stirred the embers with a stick. "Aye." "Then you'll have seen it." He looked up. "Seen what?" "The Red Storm," the man said, voice lowering. "Came out of nowhere a week past. Tore a Nilfgaardian patrol to ribbons. Left not a bone whole. The wind screamed, they said, like all the dead men of the war crying at once." Geralt said nothing, only stared into the flames. The soldier leaned closer. "You've hunted worse, I reckon. Tell me true. What is it? Some curse from the mage's war? Or one of the wild hunt's tricks?" "Neither," Geralt said. "It's a mistake given wings." The man frowned. "A mistake?" He did not elaborate. The Witcher's gaze drifted to the sky where faint clouds glowed with the last light of dusk. A crimson hue bled along the horizon. "Keep your fires burning through the night," he said, "and don't wander far. If you hear the wind rise suddenly, get below ground." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, but none argued. Geralt rose after a time and climbed the slope toward the tower. The air grew colder as he ascended, the wind picking up in fitful gusts. Inside, the stone stair spiraled. The scent of old oil and damp filled the air. At the top, he stepped onto the battlement. From there he could see far across the marsh. The world below was a sea of mist, and beneath it, faint streaks of red pulsed like veins of light through the fog. The wind blew against his face, warm, unnatural. He muttered a curse under his breath. "So you found a new heart, have you?" The marsh began to move. The reeds swayed, though there was no breeze. Ripples spread across the pools. Shapes rose from the water, figures half-formed, translucent, walking as if upon the surface itself. They were men, or what remained of them. Soldiers, still clad in Nilfgaardian armor, their bodies hollow, eyes burning faintly red. The storm had found hosts again. Geralt drew his silver sword, its runes flickering to life in the gathering dark. Below, the soldiers by the fire shouted in alarm. Steel clashed. The dead marched toward them in silence. He leapt from the battlement, landing in a roll upon the soft earth. One of the spectral soldiers lunged at him, blade flashing. Geralt parried, the impact ringing like struck glass. The thing's body flickered where his sword met it, dissolving into mist, but another took its place. They surrounded him, 10, 20, perhaps more. The Witcher spun, his blade cutting arcs of light through the gloom. For every wraith he struck down, another rose from the marsh. The red glow brightened, pulsing in rhythm with the beating of unseen wings. From the corner of his eye he saw the surviving soldiers retreat toward the tower. "Get inside," he shouted. "Seal the doors." They obeyed, slamming the heavy gates shut as Geralt fought on. The air itself thickened, pressing against his lungs. The red wind was coalescing again, drawing strength from the spirits of the slain. He traced the sign of Igni with his free hand. Flame roared from his palm, sweeping through the reeds. The heat burned away the mist, but the reprieve was brief. The fire bent backward, drawn toward the swirling heart of the storm. Geralt cursed under his breath and retreated toward higher ground. He reached a cluster of stones jutting from the marsh and climbed upon them. From there, he could see the center of the disturbance, a whirlpool of red air twisting above the water. At its heart stood a single figure, human in shape but shifting like smoke. Its voice rose above the wind. "You freed me from chains, Witcher. Now I claim yours." He steadied his breath. "You'll have to catch me first." He pressed his thumb to the rune on his sword hilt, activating the glyph carved there long ago. The blade blazed silver white. With a shout, he leapt forward, plunging straight into the eye of the storm. The world exploded into red light. He felt the force tear through him. Wind, fire, memory. He saw flashes of Eridan's face, the dragon's eyes, the burning village of red wind. The storm was showing him what it had seen, what it had become. It wanted him to understand. Then the pain hit. He drove his sword deeper into the very center of the maelstrom. The runes along its length flared brighter, channeling his strength through the metal. The red wind screamed, the sound shaking the air itself. "Enough," Geralt growled. "You've taken enough." He twisted the blade, releasing the stored energy. The explosion shattered the night. The marsh erupted in light and sound, scattering reeds and corpses alike. When it was done, silence fell once more. The mist began to settle. The faint crimson glow faded into nothing. Geralt staggered to his feet, coughing, his vision blurred. The water around him was still, reflecting only the pale face of the moon. The soldiers in the tower shouted from afar, but their voices sounded distant, unreal. He sheathed his sword slowly, his medallion no longer. And yet, as he mounted Roach and turned north once more, he felt it. a faint breath at his back, almost tender. The air stirred his hair, carrying with it a whisper that was not quite words but enough to make his jaw tighten. The red wind lived still, bound now to something far greater than stone or flesh. It had touched him, and as the Witcher rode into the dark, the wind followed. The next days blurred into one long march across a wounded land. Geralt rode north through the sodden plains, the horizon forever veiled in mist, his every step marked by the memory of the storm. The smell of scorched air clung to his cloak. The echoes of the red wind seemed to follow him in every sigh of breeze through the grass. Though the marshes lay far behind, he could still feel the weight of its breath, faint as a heartbeat behind his shoulder. The world around him bore the scars of war and witchcraft alike. Villages stood hollow, fields abandoned to weed and frost. Carrion birds gathered where once shepherds sang. He passed burned wagons, soldiers left to rot in ditches, and the bones of horses half buried in the mud. Yet in the silence that followed, he found no peace, only a sense of waiting, of something vast and unseen drawing nearer. At dusk on the third day, he came upon a crossroads. An ancient gallows stood there, its beams blackened and splintered by age. Crows clustered along it, fat and restless, their wings catching the red of the setting sun. Beneath the gallows hung no bodies now, only frayed ropes swaying gently in the wind. Geralt dismounted and ran a gloved hand along one of the posts. A faint shimmer of magic pricked his senses. Not active sorcery, but a residue. Something old. The gallows had been used once for executions by spell, the kind reserved for mages who had broken the Conclave's laws. It reeked of burnt ether and guilt. Appropriate, he muttered. Roach stamped the ground, uneasy. The wind it carried whispers that might have been voices, though none distinct. He looked north along the road. The landscape rose toward a ridge where the ruins of a keep broke the horizon. Beyond it, clouds gathered thick and low, their edges tinged faintly crimson. He swung back into the saddle and urged Roach forward. The ruins stood upon a hill of pale stone. Once, it had been a border fort of Cadwin, built to watch the Pontar crossings. Now it was a shell, its walls cracked, its gatehouse collapsed, ivy crawling through the gaps. The Witcher entered through the shattered archway. Inside, the courtyard was littered with old bones and rusted weapons, but among them lay fresher signs. Hoofprints, torn banners, the ashes of a recent campfire, Nilfgaardian scouts perhaps, or deserters. Yet the fire had gone cold days ago. He dismounted and knelt beside it. The ashes were scattered strangely, as if by wind, but no ordinary breeze. The patterns in the soot were circular, swirling outward from a single point. The medallion at his neck trembled faintly. "Here again," he said quietly. "You're circling me." He turned, scanning the ruins. The air felt too still, too dense, as if the world were holding its breath. The wind began to stir once more, rising through the hollow gate and into the courtyard. Dust lifted from the stones, dancing in slow spirals. Geralt drew his sword. The wind thickened, forming tendrils of red mist. They twisted through the broken arches, merging into a single column that stood before him like a figure without form. The air vibrated with a low hum that resonated in his bones. "Witcher," the voice murmured. He raised his sword, though his instincts told him blade alone would not avail him. "You've followed me long enough. Speak, if you can." The mist shimmered, condensing into a vague outline. Humanoid, tall, its features shifting like smoke caught in a draught. Within it burned two dim embers for eyes. You gave me your breath when you struck. Now I breathe as you do. Geralt's jaw tightened. So I was right. You're bound to me now. Bound, the voice echoed, but not yours to command. You gave me form. I will take from you what I lack. And what's that? A name? The Witcher took a step back. He had heard tales, rare and whispered only among mages, of curses that grew self-aware, seeking identity to anchor themselves in the mortal world. The Red Wind, having lost its dragon, now sought its creator anew, and in Geralt's strike it had tasted the essence of a living soul. I'm not your vessel, he said. You will be. The wind needs a shape. The storm needs a hunter. The air exploded outward. Geralt dove aside as a blast of red force struck the wall, sending shards of stone flying. He rolled to his feet, drawing a sign in the air. Irden. The circle flared violet around him, holding the mist at bay. The storm roared, swirling against the barrier. Within its voice rose a chorus of memories, Eridan's cry, the dragon's scream, the whispers of the dead villagers. It hurled them all at him, an onslaught of guilt and fury. Geralt steadied his breathing. You feed on fear. You won't find any here. He reached into his pouch and withdrew a vial of silver dust mixed with essence of dimeritium. He shattered it at his feet, the powder swirling up in a pale cloud. The reaction was immediate. The red mist recoiled, its light flickering violently. Let's see how you fare without magic to breathe, he growled. The storm lashed out again, weaker now, its voice breaking apart. Geralt advanced, sword raised high, cutting through the mist with measured strikes. Each blow dispersed more of the crimson vapor, scattering it across the courtyard like blood in water. Then suddenly, silence. The wind died. The air grew still. He lowered his sword cautiously. The ruins stood empty once more, the last trace. Yet as he turned to leave, his medallion gave a single sharp pulse, one final tremor before falling still. Gone, he murmured, or waiting. He sheathed his sword and mounted Roach once again. The sun had sunk behind the hills, leaving the world painted in the dull glow of twilight. The path ahead led north toward the mountains where the air grew thin and cold. If the Red Wind still lived, that was where it would flee, to the high places where storms were born. Geralt urged the horse onward. Behind him, the ruins of the fort stood silent, the wind whispering faintly through its broken towers. Yet as he rode into the gathering dark, the faintest breath stirred against his ear, a whisper not his own. Geralt of Rivia, it said softly, almost tenderly, hunter of monsters forged in storm. You cannot slay the wind. You can only become it. He did not look back, but his hand tightened on the reins, and for the first time in many years, a flicker of doubt touched the Witcher's heart. The wind followed him still, quiet but persistent, as though it had found what it sought at last. And above the northern peaks, thunder rumbled, a sound like distant laughter carried on the breath of the world. Roach snorted, uneasy. Geralt's eyes narrowed against the dark. Come, girl, he murmured. We ride. The horse obeyed, hooves striking sparks from the stones. The night swallowed them whole, leaving behind only the sigh of wind among the ruins. Soft, relentless and red, the northern mountains loomed like sleeping gods, their peaks veiled in cloud and snow. The road that led toward them wound through ravines and forests, the trees thick and silent, their branches heavy with frost. Geralt rode alone, the cold cutting at his face, the world painted in shades of gray and silver. Behind him stretched the long scar of his journey, the burned villages, the haunted marshes, the ruins of men and magic. Ahead lay only uncertainty, and the whisper of it came to him at night when the stars were hidden and the air stood still. A murmur soft as breath, threading through his dreams. Sometimes it was the voice of the mage Aridin, pleading for release. Sometimes it was the cry of the dragon, that creature of fire and sorrow, whose pain had birthed the curse. But most often it was his own voice he heard, cold, calm, accusing. You gave it life, Witcher. You cut it free. He slept little, trusting neither dreams nor silence. On the third night, he camped beside a frozen stream, beneath the shadow of an ancient pine. The fire crackled weakly, its light flickering against his armor. Roach stood nearby, her breath steaming in the chill. Geralt sat sharpening his sword, each scrape of the whetstone echoing through the dark. When the wind came, it came without warning. The fire guttered, the air thickened. His medallion quivered. He rose, eyes narrowing, hand moving to the hilt of his silver blade. At first there was only snow swirling between the trees. Then a shape emerged from the darkness, a rider cloaked in crimson mist. The horse beneath it was black as pitch, its mane streaming like smoke. The rider's face was hidden, its features shifting beneath the veil of the wind, yet the eyes that looked upon him burned with memory. Geralt of Rivia, the figure said, its voice the sigh of 1,000 storms. Still you hunt me. He drew his sword, not by choice. The rider dismounted, boots touching the snow without sound. You cannot escape me. The day you struck the dragon's chains, you gave me your breath. I am part of you now. Geralt's voice was calm. You mistake survival for kinship. Do I? The wind asked. You live by the sword. You kill without hate, without joy. You are the calm before the slaughter. What am I, if not the same? He said nothing. The figure stepped closer, the air rippling around it. I was born of pain. It continued. You were forged in it. The mage sought to bind. You sought to end me, and in doing so gave me purpose. I learned from you. Geralt's grip tightened on his sword. You learned to kill, to endure, it corrected, to become more than the wound that birthed me. He could see it now, faint outlines of faces swirling within the mist. The villagers of Red Wind, the soldiers from the marsh, Aridin himself, all trapped within the storm's essence, fragments of memory and will. What do you want? He asked. The wind paused. An end? But not mine. It raised an arm, and the air split with a howl. Snow and frost tore from the ground, swirling around them in a spiral of blinding red light. Geralt leapt aside as the storm struck, his sign of Quen flaring gold. The force of the impact hurled him backward into a drift. He rolled to his feet, blade flashing. The rider advanced, each step leaving trails of glowing embers in the snow. Geralt met it head-on, steel slicing through mist and air alike. Sparks burst where their weapons met, his sword of silver, the wind's blade of living flame. They fought without words, the night itself shuddering with the clash. Each blow carried weight beyond steel, a struggle not merely of strength, but of will. The red wind moved like a thought, impossible to anticipate, its strikes fueled by the rage and despair of every life it had consumed. Geralt countered with precision, every motion controlled, deliberate, shaped by years of battle and loss. At last he fainted low, then drove his sword upward through the rider's chest. The blade sank deep and the storm screamed. Red light flared, blinding him. When it faded, he stood alone. The snow was still. He looked down at the ground where the figure had fallen. There was no body, no blood, only a faint shimmer in the air, a pulse of energy that beat once, twice, and then sank into the earth. Geralt knelt, touching the snow. It was warm. The wind had vanished. The forest around him blurred, its colors bleeding away. He was no longer standing on snow, but on the blackened stones of Red Wind's square. The burned cottages surrounded him, silent and whole as they had been before the storm. He turned, sword ready. Aroden stood before him, alive, untouched by flame or curse. The mage smiled faintly. "You've come far, Witcher." "This isn't real," Geralt said. "Reality is a thin fabric," the mage replied. "You tore it when you struck the storm. You think you ended it, but you merely crossed into what it left behind. Its memory." Geralt scanned the horizon. The wind was still, but the sky above burned red. "So this is its world." "It is now yours as well," Aroden said. "You carry its mark, you breathed its power. The line between hunter and hunted is blurred." Geralt's eyes narrowed. "Then how do I end it?" The mage tilted his head. "You cannot end the wind. You can only change its course." Before Geralt could answer, the world shuddered again. The square split apart, the cottages dissolving into smoke. The air howled, dragging him upward, and the mage's voice echoed through the chaos. "Let it find peace, or it will find purpose." Then all was darkness. When Geralt woke, dawn had broken over the mountains. He lay on the frozen ground beside the dead fire, Roach standing nearby, her breath steaming in the cold. For a moment he thought it had all been dream. But when he lifted his hand, he saw faint lines of red etched along his palm, pulsing softly like veins of fire, the mark of the storm. He rose slowly, the weight of the revelation settling in his chest. The wind around him was quiet, but it moved when he did, following his breath, stirring his hair as if in recognition. He could feel its presence within him, not as an enemy now, but as something bound and restless. Geralt looked toward the horizon. The world stretched vast and pale before him. Somewhere beyond those mountains, the Nilfgaardian war still raged, men still bled, and the wind still whispered through the ruins of Red Wind. He sheathed his sword and mounted Roach. The horse shifted uneasily, as though sensing the change in him. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "We've both got ghosts to carry." He turned north toward the unseen lands beyond the peaks. The breeze followed soft and steady, brushing his shoulder like an unseen hand. And as he rode into the light of morning, the Red Wind rode with him, no longer a curse but a companion, whispering through the cold air of the world that had made them both. The hunt was over, yet the wind endured, and the Witcher for the first time could not tell whether he'd conquered the storm or become part of it. The wind was his shadow now. Wherever Geralt rode, it followed, silent, unseen, yet always present. It whispered at the edge of his hearing, threading through the tall grass and the folds of his cloak, humming faintly in the wolf medallion upon his chest. At first he had thought to master it, to drive it out with elixirs or meditation, to smother its restless stirrings with Witcher discipline. But after weeks upon the northern road, he came to understand that the Red Wind was no parasite. It had become a part of him, a reflection caught between man and storm. He rode through Caedwen's wild frontier, where the snow never fully melted and the pines grew like spears into the sky. The world was quiet there, untouched by war, save for the abandoned fortresses and broken supply wagons rusting along the frozen passes. At night, his campfires burned small against the vast dark. He no longer feared the whispers that rose in the wind. He listened. Sometimes they spoke in words he recognized, voices from memory, from places now lost. Other times it was a song, low and ancient, full of something that felt less. On the seventh night after crossing the valley, Geralt reached the edge of the Winterspine Mountains. There, nestled in a hollow of stone and pine, lay a small settlement, half a dozen huts clinging to the slope like nests. Smoke rose from their chimneys, pale against the dusk. He could smell wood smoke and tallow, and faintly, the scent of roasted meat. Civilization of a sort. He dismounted before the largest hut, its door marked with the sign of Melitele. A woman opened it, a shawl drawn around her shoulders. She was middle-aged, her face hard but not unkind. "Traveler," she greeted warily. "You'll find no tavern here. The snows closed the road weeks ago." "I'm not looking for ale," Geralt said. "Just a place to rest the horse and a bit of news." Her eyes flicked to the twin swords across his back. "Witcher, then?" "Gods preserve us." He offered a faint smile. "They rarely bother." After a pause, she stepped aside. "You'd best come in before the frost bites." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and herbs. Bundles of dried plants hung from the rafters, and in the corner a child slept under furs, his breathing shallow. Geralt noticed the dark bruise-like markings along the boy's neck, spirals faintly red even in the firelight. The woman saw his glance and clenched her jaw. "He fell ill 3 days past," she said. "The healer says it's swamp fever. But the winds..." She lowered her voice. "They've been strange. Some nights it howls through the trees like a living thing." Geralt approached the boy and placed 2 fingers lightly on his wrist. The pulse was weak but steady. His medallion stirred, vibrating softly. Not disease, then. Magic. "Not swamp fever," he said. The woman's eyes widened. "A curse?" "Of a kind." He poured a vial of celandine tincture into the hearth's water pot, the scent sharp and bitter. "Boy, and no one leaves the hut." "What is it, Witcher? Tell me. Something that shouldn't have followed me this far." He stepped outside into the cold night. The village was silent save for the wind sighing through the pines. Snow drifted down in slow, lazy flakes. He looked toward the mountains. Their peaks glowed faintly red beneath the aurora. The red wind had found a new host. He traced the sign of Írden in the snow, a faint circle of violet light pulsing at his feet. His medallion trembled violently. Then from the forest's edge came the whisper, "Geralt." The voice was soft, almost human. He turned, sword drawn. Between the trees, the snow swirled into a shape, a woman's form, pale and indistinct. Her hair was a stream of crimson smoke, her eyes the same molten hue that haunted his dreams. "Írden?" he asked. "Is that you?" The figure shook her head slowly. "He is gone. I am what remains." "The storm. You named me once. You called me wind. Yet I remember the pain of skin and fire, the heart of a dragon, the fear of a man. I am all of them, and I am dying." Geralt lowered his blade slightly. "You're fading?" The figure's outline trembled. "The world rejects what should not be. I am unraveling. But before I end, I would leave you something." He frowned. "What could a storm give me?" "Choice." The wind swirled faster, lifting the snow into a spiral. The figure's voice deepened, layered with many tones. "I can fade into nothing, and the curse will die with me. but the balance will break. The magic that bound me will return to the world untamed. It will find other hearts, other storms. Or you may keep me, bind me to your breath, as I am already half bound. You will carry my burden, my strength, my memory, but your path will never be your own again. Geralt's grip on his sword tightened. He thought of the boy in the hut, marked by the storm's echo of Aridin's desperate eyes. He thought, too, of the endless hunt, the monsters, the men, the wars that never ceased. What was one more curse in a life already filled with them? The wind waited. He sheathed his sword. You followed me this far. Might as well finish the road together. The figure smiled, and the storm folded inward. The red light faded into the Witcher's chest, vanishing like breath in frost. For a heartbeat, he felt nothing. Then came a rush of warmth, a pulse that filled his lungs, his veins, his heart. The wind was inside him now, alive, aware, whispering. When he opened his eyes, the night was calm again. The pines stood silent, the snow undisturbed. Only his medallion glowed faintly red, then stilled. He returned to the hut. The boy slept peacefully, the marks on his skin already fading. The woman stared at Geralt as he entered. It's gone, he said. He'll wake by morning. She fell to her knees, tears freezing on her cheeks. How can I thank you? Don't, he said, pulling his hood up. Just keep your fire lit. He stepped outside once more. The sky above was clear, filled with stars that glittered like shards of glass. The red wind was quiet now, but he could feel it in his breath, steady as the beat of his heart. Roach neighed softly, shaking the frost from her mane. Geralt mounted, glancing once toward the sleeping village. Then he turned toward the mountains, where dawn bled slowly into the snow. The wind rose behind him, no longer cruel, no longer cursed, but alive. It whispered through the pines, carrying words only he could hear. Together, then? Geralt nodded once. Together. And the Witcher rode on, the red wind at his back. A ghost, bound not by hate, but by a choice made in silence beneath a crimson sky. Snow fell thick upon the high pass, each flake glittering like powdered glass beneath the pale moon. The mountain wind was fierce, yet it whispered, steady and close, twining through the seams of his cloak, brushing against his face as though it sought to guide rather than chill him. The red wind was quiet tonight. He rode through the gorge where the trail narrowed to a ribbon of stone. The cliffs rose sheer on either side, jagged and black against the stars. Roach snorted, hooves clattering on the frozen path, her breath steaming in the dark. The Witcher's senses were sharp, every sound magnified. The crack of distant ice, the soft creak of the saddle, the faint whisper of the wind that lived within him. Below, far beneath the cliff's edge, a river wound through the valley, silver and still. He could see faint lights where a settlement clung to the far bank. Caer Terran, perhaps, the northernmost outpost of Cadwin's hunters. He had not intended to come so far, yet the road had its own pull, and now he found himself following it, without question, as though led by an unseen hand. He camped that night beneath an overhang of rock. The fire burned low, a small island of light in a sea of darkness. The wind circled him softly, stirring the flames, but not snuffing them out. Since the night he had chosen to bind the storm to himself, it had ceased to rage. It whispered only in fragments, words half-formed like dreams that dissolved upon waking. Sometimes he caught glimpses of memory not his own. The dragon's eye, the mage's trembling hands, the village burning under a red sky. They came without warning, leaving behind a hollow ache, a strange mixture of grief and calm. He'd become a vessel, and though he would not name it aloud, he felt a sense of uneasy companionship in that truth. At dawn, he descended toward the valley. The air was heavy with fog, the snow muffling the world to silence. He rode into Caer Terran as the sun struggled to rise. A handful of houses clustered around a timber hall, smoke drifting from chimneys. The place smelled. Children stared from doorways, their faces pale and thin. The war had found even this remote place, leaving its mark in hunger and fear. A bearded man stepped from the hall to meet him, dressed in a thick fur cloak. He bore the posture of one used to command. "Stranger," the man said, his eyes narrowing as they took in the swords upon Geralt's back. "You're no merchant and no pilgrim." "Witcher?" Geralt replied simply. The man's expression shifted. "Aye, we've heard of your kind, though it's been years since one rode this far north." "You hunt monsters?" "When they need hunting." "Then you'll find work here." The man gestured toward the village. "Something prowls the forests. Folk vanish. Herders, travelers, even hunters. No bodies found. Only the wind howling like a beast." Geralt's brow furrowed. "How long?" "Since the first snows." The Witcher glanced toward the woods that hemmed the valley. The trees were thick and dark, the kind that swallowed sound. He could feel a stirring deep within, the faint echo of his bound companion, uneasy. The red wind remembered this song. "I'll look," he said. That evening he followed the old hunter's trail into the forest. The snow grew deeper there, untouched except for scattered footprints, men, wolves, and something larger. The light faded to gray, the trees closing overhead, until only slivers of sky showed through. He moved with care, senses stretched taut. After an hour he found the first sign of trouble, a circle of disturbed snow, melted at its center, rimed with frost, yet steaming faintly, as if the earth still breathed. He crouched, pressing his fingers to the ground. The soil was warm. Then he heard it, a sound between a sigh and a growl. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ash. His medallion thrummed, and the red wind within him stirred in answer. "Not enemy," it whispered, "not beast." "Then what?" he murmured. The answer came not in words, but in sensation. A pull, a resonance. Something ancient slept beneath this forest, and the storm within him recognized it. He followed the sound until he reached a clearing ringed by ancient oaks. At its center stood a stone monolith carved with runes so old they had half eroded from the surface. Snow drifted against its base, yet none clung to the stone itself. Geralt approached, tracing a gloved hand over the symbols. The air here was alive with power, cold and vast, older than human memory. This was a place of binding, a relic of druidic craft, meant to hold what should never wake. The Red Wind's voice filled his mind, clearer than before. "This is where I was born." He froze. "The curse began here? Before curse, before man, before dragon. The wind that hunts was born of blood spilled upon this stone. The mage drew from it, thinking to heal. He took my heart and chained it. Now the chains are broken, but the heart remains." Geralt's gaze darkened. "Then it must be destroyed." "No," the voice whispered, "not destroyed, released." The ground trembled, snow sliding from the trees. The wind rose, carrying with it whispers that were not the storms, but many. Old, mournful, endless. A column of red light erupted from the monolith, spiraling upward into the sky. Geralt stepped back, raising his sword, though he knew steel would mean nothing here. The light thickened, and from its heart emerged a figure, a dragon's shape, vast and half-formed, made of flame and air. It roared soundlessly, wings of mist unfurling. The Witcher's instincts screamed to fight, but the red wind spoke again, calm and low. This is the first breath. Let it go, or the curse will live forever bound. He lowered his weapon. If I free it, what becomes of you? I am its echo. When it rises, I fade. The storm's tone was neither fearful nor pleading. It was peaceful. Geralt closed his eyes briefly. Then go. He drove his sword point first into the snow and spread his arm. The air surged around him, filling his lungs with heat and ice. The light from the monolith flared, engulfing the clearing in crimson brilliance. The dragon's shape dissolved into the storm, which rose higher, higher, until it burst like dawn breaking through cloud. When the silence returned, the snow fell softly once more. The monolith stood dark and still. The Witcher knelt beside his sword, his breath slow and heavy. His medallion no longer glowed. The voice in his mind was gone. He remained there until the stars faded from the sky and morning crept pale across the mountains. At last, he rose, taking up his sword. The forest felt different, cleaner, lighter. The curse was gone. The red wind released into the world from which it had been stolen. Somewhere far above, the breeze stirred, gentle and free. Geralt looked to the horizon where sunlight touched the peaks. Farewell, he said softly. He turned back toward the valley where the people of Caer Terran waited, and the endless work of the path called him on. The Witcher walked through the snow without a shadow, and the wind, no longer red but pure and cold, followed, singing softly of freedom and of an end well earned. Morning broke cold and white across the mountain ridge, the kind of dawn that seems older than time, where light creeps slow and cautious, unwilling to disturb what slumbers beneath the snow. The storm had passed, and yet the silence it left behind felt vast, too vast. Geralt stood at the crest of the slope, cloak pulled tight, his silver hair heavy with frost. Below him stretched the valley of Caer Terran, untouched by wind or sound. Smoke rose from the chimneys, straight as spears into the clear air. Peace had returned for now. He descended the narrow path, his boots crunching softly. The red wind was gone from the world, or at least gone from him. His medallion lay still against his chest, the hum of magic finally quiet. Only a stillness within, like the moment after a sword strike lands, neither victory nor defeat, just the breath that follows. Roach waited where he had tethered her among the pines. The mare nickered softly as he approached, and he brushed her mane with a gloved hand. "Easy, girl," he murmured, "it's done." Yet even as he said the words, he felt the faintest shift in the air, a stirring, almost like the echo of laughter, carried by a breeze too distant to name. He did not flinch nor look back. Some things are never fully gone, and the wind, above all, cannot be caged forever. When he reached the village, the people gathered at the edge of the road. They stared as though beholding a revenant. No one spoke at first. Then the bearded headman, the same who had met him days before, stepped forward. "The forest is quiet again," the man said. "No cries in the night, no tracks in the snow." "You did it." Geralt shook his head. "The forest healed itself. I only set it free." The man frowned, puzzled, but did not press. "You'll take coin, Witcher? We've little, but..." Geralt raised a hand. "Keep it. Buy salt, oil for your lamps. Teach your young ones to respect the woods." He turned toward the path northward, but a woman ran to him, her shawl drawn tight, her face lined with age and worry. She was the mother of the boy he had saved. "Witcher?" she said, breathless. He woke at dawn. Said he dreamed of flying through clouds red as flame, and a voice told him to sleep easy. Was that you? Geralt looked past her to where the mountains met the sky. No, just the wind. He mounted Roach and rode from the village before more questions could come. The road wound upward again, narrow and treacherous, but he knew its rhythm now. Snow fell as he climbed, slow and patient, coating the world in quiet absolution. By midday, the forest had thinned, giving way to rolling tundra. The sun hung pale and low, its light diffused through a haze. He stopped beside a frozen stream and let Roach drink from a hole in the ice. The Witcher knelt, cupping a handful of water, and for the first time in many weeks, it tasted clean. No iron, no ash, no memory of blood. He sat upon a boulder, drawing his cloak tighter. The silence of the wilderness pressed close, yet it was not oppressive. It was the silence of a world that endures. In that stillness, his thoughts wandered back to the mage, Aradin Vel, the man whose ambition had unraveled into tragedy. Geralt saw again the flicker of defiance in the mage's eyes, the desperate hope that power might undo suffering. Such hopes never ended well, yet the Witcher could not bring himself to hate him. Aradin had sought to heal a creature broken by war and cruelty, and in his failure had unleashed something that no man could have contained. Geralt understood that kind of failure too well. He had seen it mirrored in kings and peasants and lovers and killers alike. It was the same old tale told again and again, in different tongues. Men reaching for what should not be touched and paying the price. He reached into his satchel and drew out a small item wrapped in linen, the only thing he had taken from the site of the monolith. Unfolding the cloth, he revealed a fragment of stone, blackened and cracked. Within it glimmered the faintest thread of red, pulsing like a heartbeat, the last remnant of the red wind. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the faint warmth beneath his glove. It no longer whispered, no voices, no memories, only quiet potential, dormant and waiting. He could destroy it, grind it into dust, scatter it across the snow, but he did not. Instead, he rewrapped the fragment and tucked it into the inner pocket of his cloak, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Roach lifted her head, ears flicking toward the horizon. Geralt followed her gaze. Far to the west, dark shapes moved, riders, perhaps half a dozen, their banners black against the pale sky. Nilfgaardian scouts or northern deserters, it mattered little. Trouble was a language that spoke the same everywhere. The Witcher rose, fastening his sword belt. So much for quiet. He mounted and nudged Roach forward. The horse snorted and obeyed, hooves crunching through the frost. The riders had seen him now, one pointed, and their formation shifted, spreading out like wolves scenting prey. Geralt adjusted his cloak, the familiar weight of his swords against his back. There was no fear in him, only weariness and a kind of cold patience. He had ended a curse older than any kingdom. A handful of armed men would not unsettle him. As they drew closer, he saw their faces, pale, wind-burned, desperate, not soldiers after all, but scavengers. One called out, "Leave the horse, stranger. We'll let you keep your life." Geralt's reply was calm, almost kind. "You won't." The wind rose then, not red, not angry, but keen and swift, a northern gale that whistled through the pines. It circled him once, tugging at his cloak, stirring the air like a living thing. He felt it brush against his shoulder, a silent warning or perhaps an offer. The men advanced, When it was over, the snow lay trampled and red. The scavengers' bodies were half buried by the drifting wind, already claimed by the mountain. Geralt wiped his blade clean on a torn cloak and sheathed it. He stood for a moment listening. The wind had fallen quiet again, though not entirely. There was something new in its voice now, a tone almost like a sigh. "Not mercy," he murmured. "Just balance." He mounted Roach and turned eastward away from the blood toward the long road that vanished into mist. He did not look back. By nightfall, the storm clouds had gathered again, but this time their breath was gentle. The red wind was gone from the world, or perhaps it lived now only in the... Either way, it no longer sought vengeance. High above, the mountains swallowed the sun, and the world turned silver and gray. The Witcher rode onward, tireless as the road itself, and when the first flakes began to fall again, the wind followed softly at his back, not whispering threats or sorrow, but humming, low and wordless, like a song carried by a friend unseen. Geralt of Rivia did not smile, but his eyes softened as the storm embraced him, and for the first time in a long while, the path ahead seemed less lonely. The red wind had come full circle, and so had he.